Nurse saves injured man not knowing. He was a millionaire who would change everything. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Rain pounded mercilessly against the windshield as Emily drove along the deserted highway on the outskirts of Green Hills. Her eyes stung after an 18-hour shift at Green Hills Community Hospital, where she worked as the head nurse in the emergency department. The radio played softly in the background, barely audible beneath the sound of raindrops that seemed determined to pierce the roof of her vehicle. Her thoughts drifted between the patients she had just left and the hot cup of tea waiting for her at home when something caught her attention. A shadowy figure at the side of the road made her heart race. Instinctively, she stepped on the brake, allowing the car to slide several feet before coming to a complete stop. Through the fogged window, she could make out a human form lying in the mud. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, quickly grabbing her first aid kit, which she always carried with her, and jumping into the rain without hesitation. The body of a man lay unconscious, with several visible injuries. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Emily acted with the precision that her 15 years in the profession had given her. She checked his vital signs, stabilized his neck, and with difficulty managed to drag the man into her car. His soaked and dirty clothes revealed nothing about his identity. There were no documents, cell phone, or any other belongings. "Hang in there," she murmured as she maneuvered the car back toward the hospital. "You're going to be okay." Her return to the emergency room caused a commotion. Dr. Paul Miller, her colleague on duty, widened his eyes when he saw her enter carrying the stranger. "Emily, you just left here," he exclaimed, already running to help her. "Life has these ironies," she replied, helping to place the patient on a stretcher. "I found him on the road to Stonebrook. He has multiple injuries and possible head trauma." The following hours were intense. Emily refused to leave, actively participating in the emergency procedures. There was something about this man that intrigued her. Even unconscious, his face conveyed a disconcerting serenity, as if he were merely in a deep sleep. When his condition finally stabilized, it was past 4 in the morning. Emily was watching the heart monitor, hypnotized by the rhythmic movement of the green lines, when Dr. Miller touched her shoulder. "You need to rest," he said gently. "He's stable now. We've done all the possible tests, but without documents." "I'll register him as an unidentified patient," Emily interrupted, running her hand through her hair tiredly. "But I intend to follow the case." "Why am I not surprised?" Paul smiled, knowing his colleague's dedication well. "You always get more involved than you should." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the stranger's face, noticing for the first time his well-defined features, strong jawline, and dark hair that, even dirty with mud, appeared well-groomed. His hands, now clean, showed signs of a privileged life, well-manicured nails, without calluses or marks from heavy labor. "Who are you?" she whispered, more to herself than to the unconscious patient. "And what story brought you here?" Before leaving, Emily made sure everything was organized. She filled out the preliminary form with the available data, checked the medical prescription, and gave detailed instructions to the next shift's team. Finally, she took a small notebook from her bag and wrote a note, leaving it on the bedside table. "You're safe now. You're not alone. I'll be back to see you as soon as possible. Emily." As she left the hospital, the rain had decreased to a fine drizzle. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, announcing a new day. Emily got into her car, exhausted, but certain that something important had happened that night. Her instinct, which rarely failed, told her that this encounter would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days that followed established a new routine in Emily's life. Even on her days off, she made a point of stopping by the hospital to visit the unidentified patient. She would sit beside his bed, read excerpts from books, tell stories about the hospital's daily life, and sometimes simply sit in silence, watching his steady breathing. The staff had already grown accustomed to her constant presence. Some even joked, calling her the guardian angel. Emily didn't mind the comments. There was something inexplicable that kept her connected to this man without a past, as if an invisible thread had bound them since that rainy night. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after the rescue, that everything changed. Emily was changing the flowers in the vase, a small ritual she had established when she noticed a subtle movement. The patient's fingers moved slightly, and his eyelids began to tremble. "Dr. Miller," she called, trying to contain the emotion in her voice. "He's waking up." The doctor arrived quickly, accompanied by 2 nurses. The man's eyes opened slowly, taking a few seconds to adjust to the light. His gaze, initially unfocused, wandered around the room until finding Emily's face. Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "You're at Green Hills Community Hospital," Emily responded softly, as Dr. Miller performed the routine procedures. "I found you on the road 2 weeks ago. You were in an accident." The man furrowed his brow as if trying to process the information. His eyes, a deep brown, showed increasing confusion and distress. I can't remember," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I can't remember anything." Dr. Miller and Emily exchanged concerned looks. The doctor began a series of basic questions, name, age, hometown, but all were met with the same lost and distressed look. "It's common after head trauma," explained the doctor, trying to reassure the patient. "The amnesia might be temporary. We'll run some more tests to better assess the situation." Emily remained in the room while the tests were being conducted. She carefully observed the man's reactions, noting that despite his memory loss, his gestures and way of speaking indicated a refined education. His vocabulary, even limited by the situation, was articulate and precise. "Have you been visiting?" "A lot?" he asked after a moment of silence. "Yes," Emily answered, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. "I'm the nurse who found you that night." "Thank you," he said with a weak but genuine smile, "for saving me and for not leaving me alone." Something in the way he said those words made Emily's heart race. It was as if, even without memory, he had somehow felt her presence throughout that time. "You need a name," she said, trying to break the intensity of the moment. "We can't keep calling you unidentified patient." He seemed to consider the suggestion for a moment, his gaze lost in the window showing the evening sky. "How about Michael?" suggested Emily. "It means who is like God. Considering how you survived, I think it fits." The man smiled again, and this time the smile reached his eyes, lighting up his face in a way that made Emily hold her breath for a second. "Michael," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "Yes, I think that can work. For now." The following hours were filled with more tests and evaluations. Michael demonstrated that he had preserved general knowledge and basic skills, but any attempt to access personal memories resulted in a distressing void. It was as if his previous life had been completely erased, leaving only the foundations of his personality. At the end of the day, when Emily had to leave, she realized she was reluctant to do so. There was something different now that he was conscious, a connection that became more tangible with each shared moment. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, adjusting his pillow one last time. "I'll be waiting," Michael replied, gently holding her hand for a moment. "It's strange, but your presence is the only thing that seems familiar." Emily left the hospital that night with her heart beating to a different rhythm. As she drove home, she realized that her life had definitely changed since that rainy night. What started as an act of rescue had transformed into something deeper, more meaningful, and something told her that this was just the first page of a much larger story. Michael's physical recovery progressed rapidly, but his memory remained a mystery. During the following weeks, Emily dedicated every free moment to helping with his rehabilitation. Physiotherapy sessions turned into long conversations, and memory exercises became private games between the two. "Are you sure you've never played chess before?" asked Emily, watching in amazement as Michael moved the pieces skillfully on the board she had brought to stimulate his cognition. "Apparently, some skills stay stored somewhere in the mind," he replied, smiling as he captured another of her pieces. "It's like riding a bicycle. You don't forget, even if you don't remember when you learned." Michael's smile had become a frequent sight, lighting up the hospital room, and Emily had to admit her own heart. There was a sweetness in his manner that contrasted with the evident sophistication of his ways, the way he held cutlery, how he carried himself, how he articulated each word with precision. It was on one of these tranquil afternoons that the first disturbance happened. Emily was organizing medications when she noticed a suspicious movement by the room's window. A dark figure was watching from a distance, partially hidden behind a tree in the parking lot. When their eyes met, the figure quickly disappeared. "Did something happen?" asked Michael, noticing her tense expression. "No, nothing," she lied, not wanting to worry him, but in the days that followed, the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. The situation intensified when one night, upon arriving home after her shift, Emily found signs that someone had tried to force her window. Nothing had been taken, but the message was clear. This wasn't an ordinary burglary attempt. "You need to be careful," warned Dr. Miller when she confided her concerns. "Perhaps our mysterious patient has a more complicated past than we imagined." Her colleague's words disturbed her, but not enough to keep her away. On the contrary, each new occurrence only strengthened her determination to protect Michael and discover the truth about his past. On a particularly busy morning, as she was helping Michael with his physiotherapy exercises, a novice nurse came running into the room. "Emily, you need to see this," exclaimed the young woman, extending a tablet with a featured news article. "Look who appeared in today's paper." Before Emily could prevent it, the young nurse turned the screen toward Michael. In the headline, an old photo showed an elegant man at a social event. The face was unmistakable. It was Michael, a few years younger, wearing an impeccable suit, alongside important figures of American business. The effect was instantaneous. Michael turned pale, his hands began to tremble and his breathing became irregular. Fragmented images invaded his mind, flashes of meetings in luxurious rooms, important documents, tense conversations in marble corridors. I know this place," he murmured, pressing his temples hard. "But it's like seeing someone else's life through a fogged glass." Emily quickly dismissed the nurse and sat beside him, firmly holding his hands. "It's all right. Let's take it slow. One memory at a time." "Something's wrong, Emily," he said, his eyes revealing a profound anguish. "These images that are coming back, there's something dangerous in them, something that maybe is better left forgotten." At that moment, a noise in the corridor caught the attention of both. Hurried steps approached, authoritative voices echoed through the corridors. Emily instinctively stood up, positioning herself between the door and Michael. "Whatever is coming," she said with a determination that surprised them both, "we'll face it together." What Emily still didn't know was that that moment would mark only the beginning of a series of revelations that would transform not only their lives, but also their conceptions about loyalty, power, and the true meaning of starting over. The truth was about to emerge, bringing with it both danger and hope. The footsteps in the corridor belonged to a group of people dressed in expensive suits, led by a middle-aged woman with such an aristocratic bearing that Emily instinctively straightened her posture. Her high heels hit the hospital floor with an authority that seemed to want to bend time itself. "Michael Harrison," announced the woman, completely ignoring Emily's presence. "Or should I say, simply Michael, as you've been presenting yourself here." The name caused a new wave of vertigo in Michael, his eyes fixed on the woman, searching in her features for some connection to his nebulous past. "Helen Harrison," she continued, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and something darker. "Your aunt. I've been looking for you for weeks, since your disappearance." Emily watched the scene with growing apprehension. The physical resemblance between Michael and Helen was undeniable, the same penetrating eyes, the same elegant bearing. But there was something in the way the woman looked at her nephew that didn't match the relief of a relative finding a loved one. "Mrs. Harrison," Emily intervened, keeping her voice firm. "Your nephew is still recovering. He suffers from amnesia and needs tranquility to... And you are..." Helen cut in, finally directing her icy gaze at Emily. Emily Walker, head nurse of the emergency department. I was the one who found your nephew on the night of the accident. A flash of something, surprise, concern, passed through Helen's eyes before she recomposed her mask of indifference. Ah, yes, the savior, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The Harrison family is deeply grateful for your services. Our lawyer will contact you to arrange a generous compensation for your involvement. I'm not interested in compensation, replied Emily, feeling her blood boil. My only interest is the well-being of my patient. Michael, who until then had been observing the interaction in silence, felt a strong headache. Fragments of memory began to form. Tense meetings in a boardroom, important documents being signed, a heated discussion with Helen. The documents, he murmured, pressing his temples. There was something in the documents. Helen made a subtle gesture, and one of the suited men approached, with a wheelchair. You need to rest, dear nephew. I've already arranged your transfer to our private clinic. There we can properly care for your recovery. He's not going anywhere, declared Emily, her voice firmer than ever. As the professional responsible for the case, I do not authorize his transfer in the current state. The confrontation that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Miller, who had been alerted about the unusual movement. With his presence, the situation gained a new balance, albeit precarious. Nurse Walker is correct, he affirmed, after quickly examining the documentation presented by the family. The patient is still not in clinical condition for transfer. Besides, we need time to properly verify all these documents. Helen retreated, but her look promised that this battle was far from over. Very well. I'll stay in town to monitor my nephew's recovery. And I hope, she added, looking directly at Emily, that everyone here maintains the appropriate discretion about this situation. After the group left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Michael seemed exhausted, as if the brief encounter had drained all his energy. Are you okay? Asked Emily, sitting beside him. I don't know, he answered honestly. It's as if each memory that returns brings with it more questions than answers, but there's one thing I know for certain. He held her hand firmly. I don't trust her. I can't explain why, but every fiber of my being tells me not to trust Helen Harrison. Emily squeezed his hand back, feeling the warmth of the contact spread through her body. Then we won't trust her. We'll discover the truth together at our own pace. What neither of them knew was that, at that exact moment, Helen Harrison was making an important call in her bulletproof car. He's been found, she said dryly, but we have a problem. A nurse, she might complicate our plans. The days following Helen Harrison's visit completely transformed the hospital's routine. Private security guards began to circulate through the corridors, and journalists started to prowl the main entrance, eager for information about the found heir. The story of the millionaire who had lost his memory was already circulating in the country's main news outlets. Emily realized that her life had also changed. Reporters tried to approach her as she left work, and her social media was flooded with friend requests from strangers. But none of this bothered her as much as the constant presence of Helen's assistants, who seemed to monitor her every move. In the midst of all this chaos, an unexpected figure emerged. Richard, her ex-boyfriend, from college days. He appeared at the hospital claiming concern after seeing the story on television. Emily, it's been so long, he exclaimed, displaying the same charming smile from years ago. We need to talk. I'm worried about you getting involved with these powerful people. Richard, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine, she replied, keeping her distance. Something in her instinct alerted her that this reunion was not mere coincidence. Meanwhile, Michael continued his recovery, now divided between physiotherapy sessions and meetings with family lawyers. Memories returned in confusing fragments, faces in important meetings, heated discussions about business, documents with astronomical numbers. There's something wrong with these reports, he commented to Emily during one of her night visits when they finally were alone. Every time I try to concentrate on these numbers, I feel like there's a missing piece in the puzzle. Emily observed his restless hands shuffling through the papers. Even without complete memory, it was evident that his knowledge about business remained intact. "What exactly bothers you about these documents?" "It's the transfers," he answered, furrowing his brow. "Large sums being moved to overseas accounts days before my accident. And the digital signature. Something tells me it shouldn't be there." A noise in the corridor interrupted them. It was Richard again, this time with a bouquet of flowers. "Sorry, I didn't know you had company," he said, casting an evaluative look at Michael. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Michael straightened up in bed, his face assuming an expression that Emily had never seen before, a mixture of authority and distrust that seemed to come from his deepest memories. "And you are?" asked Michael, his voice carrying a tone that didn't match his usual gentleness. "Richard Matthews, an old friend of Emily's," he replied, extending a hand that Michael didn't shake. "Just came to bring these flowers and check if everything is all right with our favorite nurse." Emily noticed the way Richard emphasized "our," clearly trying to establish some kind of territory. But before she could intervene, a new figure appeared. At the door, Helen Harrison. "What an interesting meeting," she commented, her calculating eyes evaluating the scene. "Mr. Matthews, what a surprise to find you here. I didn't know you knew my nephew." Emily's blood ran cold. How did Helen know Richard? The exchange of glances between the two lasted only a second, but it was enough to confirm her suspicions. There was more to this story than it appeared. "Actually, I came to visit Emily," Richard answered, his casual tone sounding forced. "We're old acquaintances from college." "Fascinating how paths cross, isn't it?" commented Helen, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "Emily, dear, could we talk in private? I have a proposal that might interest you." Michael tried to protest, but Helen was already leading Emily out of the room. In the corridor, away from others' eyes, the woman's mask of cordiality fell completely. "I'll be direct, Miss Walker," said Helen, her voice low and cutting. "How much do you want to stay away from my nephew? Name your price." Emily felt as if she had been slapped. "Mrs. Harrison, I think you don't know me." "On the contrary," interrupted Helen, "I know people like you very well. Everyone has their price. And believe me, for your own good, it's better to accept my offer now." The veiled threat in Helen's words was crystal clear. But instead of fear, Emily felt an even greater determination grow within her. "You're right about one thing," she replied, keeping her voice firm. "You don't know me, excuse me." Returning to the room, Emily found Richard still trying to establish a conversation with Michael, who maintained a sepulchral silence. The atmosphere was so tense it could be cut with a knife. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier at the hospital, her mind still processing the previous day's events. She found Michael awake, looking out the window with a distant expression. On his bedside table was a brown envelope she had never seen before. "I couldn't sleep," he said without looking away from the window. "I spent the night trying to connect the dots. There's something familiar about your ex-boyfriend, Emily, something that deeply bothers me." Emily approached, noticing that his hands trembled slightly. "What did you find?" she asked, indicating the envelope with her gaze. "One of the night shift nurses brought me this. She said she found it in the hospital's old files." Michael finally turned to face her. "They're records of a patient from 5 years ago, Sophia Harrison." The name made Emily freeze. Sophia Harrison, she remembered that patient perfectly. An elegant lady who spent her last days in the hospital, always with a gentle smile on her face, even amidst the pain. "Your mother," whispered Emily, the memories returning like a whirlwind. "I took care of her. How did I not realize before? She had the same eyes as you." Michael took the envelope, removing an old photo from it. In it, Sophia appeared in a hospital bed, smiling with Emily by her side. "She wrote about you in her diary. She talked about a young nurse who restored her faith in humanity in her final moments." Tears began to form in Emily's eyes. "She was special. We spent hours talking. She always talked about her son, about how he was different from the rest of the family, how he had a genuine heart." "It seems that fate has a peculiar sense of humor," commented Michael, his voice thick with emotion. Of all the people who could have found me on that road. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Dr. Miller with a concerned expression on his face. "Emily, we need to talk. In private." In the corridor, the doctor showed her a series of documents. "I just received this. These are records of Michael's accident, his cars. It wasn't a common accident. There was tampering with the brakes." Emily felt her blood freeze. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And there's more." Paul lowered his voice even further. "That ex-boyfriend of yours, Richard, he was here asking strange questions about Michael's medical records even before the family showed up. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a frightening way. Richard's constant presence, Helen's prior knowledge about him, the attempts to distance Emily from the case." Returning to the room, Emily found Michael examining more documents that had arrived with the lawyers. His face was pale. "I found it," he said without preamble. "The signature that shouldn't be there. It was my aunt's, authorizing multi-million-dollar transfers days before the accident. But I never gave that authorization. And there's more. Richard Matthews's name appears on several internal company documents." "Michael," Emily hesitated, knowing her next words would change everything. "Dr. Miller just showed me the reports of your accident. It wasn't an accident." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael closed his eyes as if trying to organize the chaos in his mind. When he opened them again, there was an iron determination in his gaze. "Emily," he said, holding her hand firmly, "I need you to trust me. What I'm going to ask you now might seem crazy, but it's the only way for us to discover the truth." She squeezed his hand back, feeling the familiar warmth of that touch that had become her safe harbor. "I trust you. I've always trusted you. Then help me get out of here tonight. There's a place I need to visit, a place that appears in my dreams, and something tells me that's where we'll find the answers we're looking for." Emily knew that this decision could cost her job, her reputation, and perhaps even more. But looking into Michael's eyes, remembering Sophia and all the invisible connections that had brought them to this point, she had no doubts. "I'll help you," she answered, her voice firm. "But we need to be very careful. Helen has eyes everywhere." What they still didn't know was that, at that exact moment, a secret meeting was taking place in Helen Harrison's office. Richard was there, along with other suited men, all discussing the next step of a plan that couldn't fail. The Harrison empire was at stake, and they would do anything to maintain it. The escape plan was meticulously crafted over the following hours. Emily secured discreet help from Dr. Miller, who, after learning about the accident reports, agreed to provide cover. The biggest challenge would be to evade the security guards, positioned by Helen at strategic points around the hospital. "The maintenance car arrives at 8 p.m. for the shift change," explained Emily to Michael as she arranged his belongings in a small backpack. "Joe, the driver, is my longtime friend. He'll help us." Michael, already dressed in ordinary clothes that Emily had brought, observed the corridor movement through the crack in the door. "There are 2 guards at the elevator and 1 at the emergency stairs," he whispered. "How will we get past them?" A discreet smile appeared on Emily's lips. "Leave it to me. I've worked 15 years in this hospital. I know every shortcut and secondary passage." The plan began to unfold at 7:45 p.m. Dr. Miller initiated a small commotion in the emergency room, claiming an emergency that required immediate attention. The guards, following protocol, had to reposition themselves to control the increased flow of people. Emily took advantage of the distraction to guide Michael through a side corridor, mainly used by the cleaning staff. Through a series of service doors and narrow corridors, they reached an older, rarely used area of the hospital. "Here," she indicated, pointing to an apparently locked door. With a precise movement, she manipulated the old lock. "This passage leads directly to the employee parking lot." As they traversed the dark path, Emily felt Michael's hand reach for hers. The touch, now familiar, conveyed both nervousness and confidence. It was impressive how in such a short time they had developed this silent connection. "You're risking everything for me," he murmured, his voice laden with emotion. "Your job, your career." "I'm doing what's right," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Besides, your mother would do the same for me." The mention of Sophia seemed to strengthen Michael's determination. When they finally reached the employee parking lot, Joe was already waiting for them with the maintenance car, engine running. "Quick," whispered the driver, opening the back door. "There's strange movement at the main entrance." They had barely settled in the vehicle when they saw Richard crossing the parking lot with hurried steps, talking on the phone. Emily and Michael instinctively ducked down, their hearts racing. "Helen?" They could hear Richard's voice echoing. "Something's wrong. I can't contact the security guards on the third floor." The maintenance car passed slowly through the service gate, Joe maintaining a constant speed to avoid attracting attention. As soon as they gained the street, Emily released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Where to?" asked Joe, keeping his eyes on the road. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching in his fragmented memories for the right path. "Harrison Estate," he finally answered, "but not the current one. The old one where I grew up, where my mother lived." "Are you sure?" questioned Emily, concerned. "That must be the first place they'll look for us." "Exactly why no one will. Imagine we'd go there," he replied, a determined gleam in his eyes. "Besides, there's something in that house, something important I need to find." The journey was tense. Each red light seemed an eternity. Emily kept her eyes alert on the rearview mirror, expecting at any moment to see security cars following them. But the streets remained surprisingly calm. The old Harrison Estate was on the outskirts of the city, an imposing construction from the early 20th century that had been practically abandoned after the family moved to a more modern residence in the business center. When Joe finally stopped the car on a side street, the sight of the mansion made Michael shudder. Fragments of memory began to emerge: games in the garden, his mother's smile, whispered conversations in dark corridors. "Thank you, Joe," said Emily, embracing her friend. "You've already done more than enough. Now you need to go back, so as not to raise suspicions." After the car departed, Emily and Michael stood for a moment, observing the mansion that rose before them like a silent sentinel of secrets from the past. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Emily, noticing the tension in Michael's shoulders. "No," he answered honestly, "but I need to. For my mother, for you, for everything they tried to take from me." Together, they began to walk toward the back of the property. What they didn't know was that at that exact moment, an old and forgotten security system had been activated, sending a silent alert to a number that Helen Harrison had never removed from her contact list. The old Harrison Estate emanated a melancholic aura under the moonlight. Emily and Michael managed to enter through a side door at the back, whose access code spontaneously emerged in his memory, another fragment of his past returning at the precise moment. The interior of the house was a time capsule. Furniture covered by white sheets created ghostly shapes in the shadows. The smell of mold and abandonment couldn't completely mask the essence of a home that had once been full of life. "This way," whispered Michael, guiding Emily through a wide corridor. My mother's office was at the end of this corridor. As they walked, Michael occasionally stopped, touching specific objects: a bronze candelabra, the stair railing, an old painting on the wall. Each touch seemed to awaken more memories. "She used to work late," he commented, his voice choked with emotion. "I would stay awake waiting for her to finish, just so I could say goodnight." Sophia Harrison's office remained practically intact, as if awaiting her return. A thick layer of dust covered the elegant furniture, but the meticulous organization of objects was still evident. "What exactly are we looking for?" asked Emily, watching Michael examine every inch of the room with a concentrated look. "I'm not sure," he replied, running his fingers over the surface of the old desk. "But in recent nights I've been dreaming about this place, about a secret drawer, a compartment that only my mother knew about." Emily began to help with the search, carefully examining each piece of furniture. That's when she noticed something. Curious in the large portrait of Sophia that dominated one of the walls. "Michael, look at this. The frame, there seems to be an irregularity here." When he touched the point indicated by Emily, a soft click sounded, and a small drawer discreetly projected from the base of the frame. Inside were a flash drive and a yellowed envelope addressed to Michael. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. Sophia's elegant handwriting filled several pages, but it was the first sentence that made his heart stop for a moment. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it means my suspicions were correct. They would try to silence the truth." Emily approached, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder as he continued reading. The letter revealed a complex web of financial manipulations and questionable decisions made by Helen and her allies, using the Harrison Empire for operations that bordered on illegality. "My mother discovered everything," murmured Michael, his voice laden with painful understanding. "She was gathering evidence, preparing to expose the truth, and then a noise coming from the lower floor interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps. More than one person. Emily quickly turned off the flashlight they were using. "Quick," she whispered. "We need to get out of here." But before they could move, Helen's voice echoed through the corridor. "Michael, I know you're here. The house still has motion sensors, dear nephew. Come, we need to talk civilly." Michael quickly put the letter and flash drive in his pocket, his eyes searching for an escape route. Emily was already one step ahead, silently opening a side door that gave access to a small veranda. "There's always a way out," she whispered, remembering the words Sophia used to say during their conversations at the hospital. "We just need to stay calm and trust each other." The footsteps were approaching. The light from flashlights was beginning to illuminate the corridor. Michael looked at Emily, and at that moment, a certainty established itself between them. No matter what happened next, they would face it together. The veranda offered access to an old service staircase, partially covered by ivy. It was risky, but it was their only option. As they began the cautious descent, Richard's voice joined. "Helen's on the upper floor." "They can't have gone far," his voice echoed. "The evidence needs to be recovered, Helen. You know what will happen if those documents come to light." Emily and Michael exchanged significant looks. Now they had absolute certainty. Whatever was on that flash drive and in Sophia's letter was important enough to justify all the actions of Helen and her allies. The staircase creaked slightly under their feet, making their hearts accelerate. With each step, the tension increased. It wasn't just an escape. It was a race against time, against power, against a system that for years had fed on secrets and manipulations. And amid all this, something even deeper was strengthening. The bond between a nurse who had always followed her heart and a man who, even without memory, had never lost his essence. The rain began to fall when Emily and Michael finally managed to distance themselves from the mansion. The heavy drops reminded them of that fateful night when their destinies first crossed. Now soaked and breathless, they needed to find a safe place to examine the recovered documents. "I know a place," said Emily, guiding them through secondary streets. "My grandmother left a small house on the outskirts of town. Nobody knows about it except my family." After almost an hour of walking, they arrived at a modest house hidden among lush trees. The interior was simple but welcoming, preserving the essence of the lady who had lived there. Emily lit some lights and provided dry towels. "We need to see what's on this flash drive," said Michael, his hands still trembling slightly. "But first, I think you need to read this letter too." Emily sat beside him on the old sofa as he unfolded the pages written by Sophia. With each paragraph, her expressions changed: surprise, understanding, indignation. "Your mother knew everything," murmured Emily, her voice filled with admiration. "She had been gathering evidence for years, documenting each irregularity, each diversion. And she paid a high price for it," completed Michael, his voice thick with emotion. "Now I understand why Helen always so rigidly controlled my access to the company documents after my mother's passing." They connected the flash drive to the laptop that Emily kept in the house. A folder opened, revealing hundreds of meticulously organized files: financial spreadsheets, suspicious contracts, records of secretly recorded meetings. Sophia had built a solid case against her own sister-in-law. "Look at this," pointed Emily, indicating a series of transfers. "These values, they're identical to those that appeared in the hospital documents before your accident." Michael leaned over the screen, his business memories returning in full force. They were using the company's charitable foundation as a front. They were diverting money that should go to public hospitals, including where you work. A strong thunderclap shook the windows, startling them. The storm outside was increasing, mirroring the turbulence of their discoveries. "Your mother had a plan," continued Emily, reading more of the letter. "She didn't just want to expose the crimes. She wanted to transform the company, use its power to really make a difference." "And now I know what I need to do," said Michael, a new determination in his voice. "I'll fulfill her dream. But first," he took Emily's hand, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. "I need to tell you something I remembered about the last time I saw my mother." Sophia had mentioned Emily on her hospital bed, describing the young nurse who brought light to her difficult days. "She said you had the same heart as me, the same willingness to do what's right no matter the cost." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "She always said that the universe has its own way of uniting kindred souls." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car approaching. They ran to the window, their hearts racing. Through the curtain of rain they saw headlights illuminating the entrance to the property. "How did they find us?" whispered Emily. But the answer came as a punch to the stomach. Richard knew about that place. She had mentioned her grandmother's house during their relationship years ago. "Is there a way out through the back?" asked Michael, quickly gathering the documents. "Yes, through the garden, but with this rain." "We have no choice," he interrupted, taking her hand. "Trust me." Emily nodded without hesitation. "Always." As they prepared for another escape into the stormy night, Emily realized that something had fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer just the nurse and the patient, the rich and the commoner, the man without memory and his savior. They were partners, united by a purpose greater than themselves. The sound of footsteps on the front porch echoed through the house. Emily quickly turned off the lights, while Michael checked the back exit. The rain continued to fall relentlessly, but now, instead of fear, they felt a strange sensation of déjà vu, as if fate was once again placing them on a rainy night, testing their strength and determination. The exit through the back of the house led to a small grove that Emily knew well from her childhood. Even with the torrential rain, she could identify the safe paths between the trees. Michael followed close behind, the documents protected in a waterproof folder they had found in the house. The car headlights created ghostly shadows through the vegetation, and authoritative voices began to echo around the property. Among them, Richard stood out, giving orders to surround the perimeter. "He knows this place," whispered Emily, guiding Michael along a particularly narrow path, "but not as well as I do." They advanced along the slippery trail until they reached a small stone structure, an old tool shed that her grandmother used. Emily groped in the dark until she found the key hidden under a loose stone. Inside the shed, soaked and breathless, they could finally take a break. Michael took the folder with the documents from inside his jacket, checking if everything was intact. "We need a plan," he said, his voice low but firm. "We can't keep running forever." Emily nodded, wringing water from her hair. "You're right, and I think I know where to start." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "Dr. Miller, he has contacts in the press, trustworthy people who can help us expose all of this." A noise from outside made them freeze. Footsteps were approaching, and a flashlight beam scanned the ground near the shed. "Emily," Richard's voice sounded dangerously close, "I know you're here. Let's talk civilly. This doesn't have to end badly." Michael held Emily's hand tightly, his eyes conveying a silent message of protection, but it was the determined expression on her face that surprised him. "Enough running," she whispered, standing up. "It's time to confront them." Before Michael could protest, Emily opened the shed door. The rain had decreased to a fine drizzle, and Richard was standing a few meters away, his figure illuminated by the distant headlights. "Finally came to your senses?" he said, a fake smile on his face. "Helen is being generous, Emily. The offer value has doubled." "Why, Richard?" she asked, her voice laden with disappointment. "Why get involved with people like this?" "Why?" he laughed bitterly. "Look at you, always so righteous, so dedicated. Do you know how much an executive of the Harrison Foundation earns? In 1 month, I earn more than you do in an entire year. And how much does your conscience cost? Michael's voice sounded firm as he exited the shed, positioning himself beside Emily. How much is it worth to participate in a scheme that diverts money from public hospitals? Richard momentarily lost his composure. You don't understand anything. The Harrison Foundation is bigger than all of us. What you do is steal from those who need it most, interrupted Emily. How many lives could have been saved with the money you diverted? A new car approached, and Helen Harrison emerged from the darkness like an elegant shadow. Always so dramatic, dear, she said, her condescending tone. The world isn't black and white as you think. No, replied Michael, taking a step forward. But there is right and wrong. My mother knew that, and she paid the price for trying to do the right thing. The mention of Sophia made Helen visibly shudder. Your mother was an idealist who didn't understand how the real world works. She understood perfectly, retorted Michael, his voice growing in intensity. And she left evidence, all the evidence we need to expose you. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the sound of the drizzle on the leaves of the trees. Helen took a step forward, her face a mask of controlled fury. You really think you can fight against us? Against the entire system we've built? No, replied Emily, intertwining her fingers with Michael's. He's not alone in this fight. At that moment, different headlights illuminated the scene. Dr. Miller emerged from one of the cars, accompanied by 2 people whom Emily recognized as investigative journalists from an important newspaper. Actually, said the doctor, a satisfied smile on his face, none of us is alone in this fight. Helen's expression faltered for the first time, while Richard took an involuntary step backward. The game had changed, and everyone there knew it. The truth, guarded for so long in the dark corners of the Harrison Empire, was about to come to light. The days following the confrontation at Emily's grandmother's house were intense. The press transformed the case into one of the year's biggest corporate investigations. Headlines featured photos of the Harrison Empire, while special reports revealed the Foundation's fund diversion scheme. Michael, now with his memory almost fully restored, decided to call a press conference in the auditorium of Green Hills Community Hospital. The choice of location was not by chance. It was a clear declaration of his new priorities. This hospital, he began, his firm voice echoing through the microphone, represents everything my mother believed in. It's here that we see the true meaning of caring for people. The auditorium was packed with journalists, hospital staff, and curious onlookers. Emily watched from the front row, her heart overflowing with pride as she saw Michael, impeccable in his blue suit, facing the cameras with a dignity that strongly resembled Sophia. The Harrison Foundation was created with a noble purpose, ironically, he continued. My mother dreamed of transforming the reality of public health in our country, but that dream was corrupted by people who placed greed above the common good. The slide presentations showed documents, spreadsheets, and recordings, all the evidence, meticulously gathered by Sophia and preserved until that moment. Helen's face appeared in various records, along with other important executives. I'm not here just to expose a crime, declared Michael, his gaze meeting Emily's for a brief moment. I'm here to announce a transformation. From today, the Harrison Foundation will be completely restructured. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Michael paused dramatically before continuing. The entire administrative board will be replaced. Every penny diverted will be returned to hospitals with interest and corrections. But more than that, we will triple investments in public health over the next 5 years. The announcement caused an explosion of flashes and questions. Michael raised his hand, asking for silence for his final declaration. And to ensure that this transformation is truly effective, I have the pleasure of announcing that the new executive director of the Foundation will be someone who deeply understands the real needs of public health. Emily felt her heart stop for a moment when Michael extended his hand in her direction, inviting her to join him on the stage. Nurse Emily Walker not only saved my life on that rainy night, he said, his voice laden with emotion. She also cared for my mother in her final moments, and now she will help us fulfill the dream that Sophia had for this foundation. As she climbed onto the stage, Emily remembered all the exhausting nights in the emergency room, all the patients she couldn't help due to lack of resources, all the times she had to improvise with what little she had. Now, she would have the power to change that reality. "I accept this responsibility," she said into the microphone, her voice firm despite the emotion, "not as a position of prestige, but as a mission. Every public hospital, every health post, every professional in the field deserves dignified working conditions." The conference extended for hours, with questions about the Foundation's future plans, ongoing investigations, administrative changes. But the most touching moment came when an elderly nurse from the hospital stood up to speak. "I knew Sophia Harrison," she said, tears in her eyes. "She always said that one day her son would understand the true meaning of caring for people. Today she would be proud." Michael needed to pause to control his own emotion. Emily, by his side, discreetly held his hand, offering the silent support that had become her trademark. Outside the auditorium, the city continued its normal rhythm. Ambulances came and went, doctors and nurses continued their tireless work. But something had fundamentally changed that day, a promise of transformation that began with the courageous gesture of a mother, was preserved by the love of a son, and would be realized through the dedication of a nurse who never hesitated to do what was right. The news of the Harrison Foundation's restructuring swept across the country like a breath of hope. In the days following the press conference, Emily found herself immersed in a new reality, dividing her time between learning the administrative intricacies of the foundation and maintaining her practical work at the hospital, something she insisted on not abandoning. "You don't need to keep working shifts," said Michael one afternoon, finding her in the emergency room after a meeting with investors. "You already have enough responsibility with the foundation." Emily smiled as she organized medications. "Yes, I do. This is where I keep my feet on the ground, where I remember exactly why we're doing all this." Michael observed her with admiration, recognizing in her the same dedication his mother had always demonstrated. It was impressive how fate had intertwined their lives in such profound ways. The transformation of the foundation began with the smaller hospitals, those suffering most from the lack of resources. New equipment was delivered, wards were renovated, professionals were hired. Each change was closely monitored by Emily, who made a point of personally verifying that everything was being implemented correctly. "You're really changing things," commented Dr. Miller, now the clinical director of the community hospital, during an evaluation meeting. "In 3 months, we've managed to reduce the waiting time for surgeries by 40%. The work was intense, but rewarding. Emily and Michael formed a perfect partnership. She, with her practical knowledge of the healthcare system, he with his experience in management and business. Together, they were fulfilling the dream that Sophia had planted years ago. News about Helen and her associates arrived sporadically. The judicial process followed its course, and the evidence was irrefutable. Richard had made a cooperation agreement, revealing even more details of the diversion scheme. On a particularly significant afternoon, Michael took Emily to see a special place, the old winter garden of the Harrison estate, now restored to its original splendor. "My mother spent hours here," he told her, guiding her among the carefully cultivated flowers. It was her refuge where she planned all the foundation's social projects. Emily delicately touched a white orchid, Sophia's favorite. She would be so happy to see all this happening. "She is seeing it," Michael replied softly, taking Emily's hand. "And you know what else? She was right about you from the beginning." "What do you mean?" "I found another diary of hers," he explained, taking a small notebook from his pocket. "In the last entry, she wrote something about you after one of your shifts caring for her." Michael opened the diary to a marked page and read, "Today I met someone special, a young nurse with gentle eyes and firm hands. There's something about her that reminds me of my son, the same determination to do what's right, the same generous heart. Perhaps one day their paths will cross, and when that happens, I'm certain they will accomplish great things together." Tears flowed freely down Emily's face. Michael put away the diary and embraced her tenderly. "She united us," whispered Emily against his chest. Somehow, even after departing, she found a way to bring us together. And now we have a mission to fulfill, completed Michael, moving away just enough to look into her eyes, to honor her legacy, to transform her dream into reality. The afternoon. Sun filtered through the glass roof of the winter garden, creating a mosaic of light and shadows around them. It was a moment of peace after all the turbulence, a moment of promises and new beginnings. "Do you know what else your mother wrote?" asked Emily, remembering the conversations she had with Sophia. "That true power lies not in money or influence, but in the ability to make a difference in people's lives." Michael smiled, recognizing his mother's words. "And that's exactly what we're going to do, one hospital at a time, one patient at a time." There, surrounded by the flowers that Sophia had loved so much, they sealed this commitment with a gentle kiss, not just a gesture of love between two people, but a symbol of union between two hearts that had found in each other the strength to fight for something greater than themselves. The following months brought significant changes not only to the Harrison Foundation, but to the entire region's healthcare system. Green Hills Community Hospital, previously known for its deficiencies, was becoming a reference in public care. Emily personally coordinated each new project, always with Michael's unconditional support. On a particularly busy morning, while Emily was supervising the installation of new equipment in the pediatric ward, a novice nurse sought her out, visibly excited. "Miss Emily, you need to see this," said the young woman, guiding her to the waiting room. "It's Mrs. Mary, the one who always brought her grandson for asthma treatment. She's crying, but from happiness." In the waiting room, Mary was hugging little Johnny, 6 years old, while talking to other mothers. 3 months, she was saying, smiling through tears. "Just 3 months of treatment with the new medications, and my grandson is a different child. Before, we used to spend entire nights in the emergency room." Emily felt her heart warm. It was stories like this that gave meaning to all the hard work. Each life transformed, each family helped, was a confirmation that they were on the right path. Later, in her office at the foundation, Emily was reviewing reports when Michael entered, carrying an old folder. "I found something interesting in my mother's archives," he said, sitting in front of her. "A project she never managed to realize. An integrated network of teaching hospitals focused on training new professionals while providing free care to the population." Emily put the reports aside, intrigued. That would be revolutionary. We could not only treat patients, but form a new generation of doctors and nurses committed to public health. "Exactly as my mother dreamed," completed Michael, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "And I think we finally have the conditions to make this a reality." This project quickly took shape. The old Harrison estate, now completely renovated, would be transformed into the first campus of the Sophia Harrison Institute of Teaching and Research in Health. The gardens she had loved so much would give way to living spaces for students and patients. Dr. Miller, who closely followed all the changes, brought a valuable suggestion during one of the planning meetings. "We need to include a scholarship program," he proposed, "give opportunity to talented young people who would never dream of attending medical or nursing school due to the costs." The idea was immediately embraced. Emily remembered her own journey, the difficulties she faced to graduate, the nights studying after exhausting shifts. "Let's go beyond," she suggested, excited. "We can create a mentoring system where each scholarship recipient will be accompanied by an experienced professional. We don't just want to train technicians, we want to form humanists." The enthusiasm was contagious. Hospital employees who previously felt undervalued now actively participated in the changes, suggesting improvements and sharing experiences. One afternoon, while overseeing the institute's construction, Michael surprised Emily with a revelation. "I found some more notes from my mother," he said, his voice soft. "She wrote about you until her last days. Did you know she called you Angel in Scrubs?" Emily smiled, remembering the long conversations with Sophia. "She always said that angels exist, but prefer to wear scrubs rather than wings. I would reply that she was the angel, always thinking of others." "And she was right about you," continued Michael, taking her hand. "Not just for taking care of her, but for everything you're doing now. You've transformed not only the foundation, but also me." The afternoon sun bathed the construction site, where what was once a symbol of power and ostentation was transforming into a place of hope and healing. Workers worked to the sound of their own conversations and laughter, raising not just walls but dreams. "You know what moves me the most?" said Emily, observing the movement. "Seeing how a tragedy can transform into a blessing. Your accident, which could have been the end of everything, ended up being the beginning of something much greater." Michael embraced her from behind, both contemplating the future they were building. "My mother always said that there are no coincidences, only predestined encounters." The gentle wind swayed the curtains of the newly installed windows, bringing the fragrance of flowers from the garden, the same ones that Sophia had loved so much. It was as if she were there, blessing each new step of this journey of transformation. The inauguration of the Sophia Harrison Institute was scheduled for a special date, exactly 1 year after the rainy night when Emily found Michael on the road. The event would gather authorities, health professionals, and mainly the people who would benefit from the project. On the morning of the inauguration, Emily woke before sunrise. She put on her white scrubs over her formal dress, a symbolic choice that represented the union between her life as a nurse and her new role in the foundation. On her chest, a special brooch, a small silver orchid, a gift that Sophia had left for her with a nurse before departing. "You look beautiful," said Michael, meeting her in the Institute's garden. He had also chosen a significant outfit, the blue suit his mother had loved most, with a pocket square printed with small orchids. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing how she constantly adjusted her scrubs. "A little," admitted Emily, "but it's a good nervousness, like the one I felt during my first shifts, knowing I could make a difference in someone's life." The main auditorium was packed. In the front rows, familiar faces: Dr. Miller, the hospital staff, Mrs. Mary with little Johnny, now completely recovered from asthma. On the walls, photos told the story of the foundation, with special emphasis on a beautiful portrait of Sophia. Michael was the first to speak. "A year ago, I was a man without memory, saved by an angel in scrubs on a stormy night," he began, drawing smiles from the audience. "Today, I'm here not just with my memories recovered, but with new dreams and purposes." He continued, telling the story of the foundation's transformation, the fight against corruption, the realization of his mother's dream. When it came time to call Emily to the stage, his voice thickened with emotion. "This extraordinary woman not only saved my life that night, but also cared for my mother in her final moments. And now she's helping to save thousands of other lives through this institute." Emily took the stage to warm applause. Her speech went straight to the heart of everyone present. "Today we're not just inaugurating a building," she said, her voice firm and emotional. "We're inaugurating a dream that began in the heart of an extraordinary woman, Sophia Harrison, who believed that true power lies in serving others." She continued, presenting the programs that would be implemented: scholarships for underprivileged youth, the Tropical Disease Research Center, the free specialized treatment ward. But above all, she concluded, we're inaugurating a new concept of caring, because here each patient will be treated with the same dedication that I once gave to Sophia, that Michael received on that rainy night, that every healthcare professional dreams of being able to offer. The ceremony culminated with the unveiling of a special plaque in the Winter Garden, now transformed into a living area for recovering patients. The plaque bore a phrase that Sophia used to repeat: "Love is the most powerful medicine, and compassion its main component." As guests circulated through the institute, Emily and Michael found a moment of privacy in what had been Sophia's office, now transformed into a library. "She would be so proud," said Emily, observing Sophia's photo that occupied a prominent place on the wall. "She is," replied Michael, embracing her from behind, "and I'm sure it was she who guided my car to that road that night, knowing you would be there." The sound of laughter and animated conversations came through the open window. Outside, the institute pulsed with new life, students getting to know their classrooms, patients discovering the new treatment spaces, professionals planning future projects. "You know what moves me the most," said Emily, turning to face Michael. "Seeing how love can transform everything. A mother's love for her son, love for one's profession, love for others, and our love, born amidst so much turbulence." Michael smiled, gently touching the orchid brooch on her scrubs. "My mother always said that true love is like an orchid. It needs care, patience, and dedication to bloom. But when it blooms, its beauty exceeds all expectations." At that moment, a ray of sunlight crossed the window, illuminating Sophia's photo. It was as if she were smiling, blessing not only the love of her son with the nurse who had conquered his heart, but also all the good that would be born from that union. 6 months after the inauguration of the Sophia Harrison Institute, the results already exceeded all expectations. The first class of scholarship recipients, composed of 50 talented young people from different parts of the country, brought vibrant energy to the corridors. The mentoring program, conceived by Emily, created deep bonds between experienced professionals and new talents. On a particularly significant afternoon, Emily was conducting a meeting with the mentors when extraordinary news arrived. The Institute had been selected by the World Health Organization as a model of excellence in public care and professional training. "It's more than recognition," commented Dr. Miller, now coordinator of the mentoring program. "It's proof that dreams can transform into reality when there's dedication and purpose." The news coincided with another special moment. While organizing Sophia's last documents, Michael found a sealed envelope addressed to "My son and his future life companion." The date marked for opening was exactly that day. "She knew," murmured Michael, looking at Emily with moist eyes. Somehow she always knew this moment would come. Together, sitting in the winter garden where so many memories had been built, they opened the envelope. Sophia's elegant handwriting filled several pages, but it was the first paragraph that made their hearts race. "My dear son and my sweet Emily. Yes, I know it's you, my nurse with the giant heart. If you're reading this letter, it means that destiny has fulfilled its role. Love, that mysterious force that moves the universe, found a way to unite you two." Emily held Michael's hand tightly as they continued reading. Sophia described how she had recognized in Emily the same essence of goodness and determination she saw in her son. She talked about her dreams for the foundation, about how she believed that the true purpose of wealth was to serve others. "But above all," the letter concluded, "I want you to know that the greatest legacy we can leave in this world is not buildings or fortunes, but the love we plant in people's hearts. Michael, my beloved son, in Emily, you found not just a companion, but a mission partner. And Emily, my dear, in my son, you found someone who shares your vision of a more just and compassionate world." The last words of the letter brought a smile to both their lips. "Now I have just one recommendation. Don't let the grandeur of the work you accomplish overshadow the simplicity of the love you feel. For it is from this love that the strength will be born to continue transforming lives." That same night, the Institute received an unexpected visit. An elderly lady, supported by a cane, asked to meet the angel in scrubs who had inspired so many. Changes. She was a former patient of the community hospital who years before had been attended by Emily on a difficult night. "I never forgot your compassionate look," said the lady, emotional. "And now, seeing all this that you have built, I understand that that look was just the beginning of something much greater." The visit inspired Emily to create yet another project, a special welcoming program for the elderly, which would combine medical care with social and cultural activities. The Winter Garden, so loved by Sophia, would be the heart of this new project. "We'll call it the Garden of Memories," she suggested to Michael, "a place where people can not only receive treatment, but also share their stories, their dreams, their experiences." Michael embraced the idea with enthusiasm. "My mother always said that each person carries a garden within themselves. Some just need a little care to bloom again." As they planned this new project, watching the sun set through the glass roof of the garden, both felt a deep certainty. They were not only honoring Sophia's memory, but building their own legacy of love and care. The Sophia Harrison Institute had become more than a center of excellence in healthcare. It was a living testimony to how love can transform tragedy into triumph, pain into purpose, and dreams into reality. And at the center of it all was the story of a nurse who stopped to help a stranger on a stormy night, proving that the greatest miracles often begin with the simplest gestures. The Garden of Memories quickly became the beating heart of the Sophia Harrison Institute. In its carefully planned walkways, among orchids and roses, life stories intertwined with stories of healing. Emily made a point of spending some time there every day, talking with patients, listening to their experiences. It was during one of these conversations that she met Celeste, an 85-year-old lady who had worked as a housekeeper at the Harrison estate during Michael's childhood. Her stories about Sophia were true treasures. She would spend hours in this very garden, Celeste recounted, her eyes shining with memories. She always said that flowers were like people, each one unique, each one needing a special kind of care to bloom. Michael, who was increasingly actively participating in the Institute's daily life, found in Celeste a precious link to his past. Through her stories, long-forgotten memories returned to the surface, simple moments with his mother, life lessons that she subtly transmitted. "I remember as if it were yesterday," said Celeste one afternoon as they had tea in the garden. Sophia always said that her son had a heart different from the other Harrisons. "He'll understand one day," she would say, "that true wealth lies in doing good." The Institute's impact on the community grew each day. The scholarship program had already been expanded, doubling the number of beneficiaries. The specialized treatment ward received patients from across the country, offering hope where before there had only been despair. Emily maintained her routine of shifts in the emergency room, now no longer out of necessity, but by choice. "It's my way of keeping my feet on the ground," she explained when questioned. "Each patient I attend reminds me exactly why we started all this." On a particularly busy morning, while attending to a young mother with her baby, Emily noticed something special. The woman was one of the first scholarship recipients of the Institute, now graduated and working as a pediatrician. "You changed my life, Imun," said the young doctor with tears in her eyes. "Not just mine, but that of all the patients I can now help." The cycle of transformation was completing itself. Those who once were helped became agents of change, multiplying the good in a chain reaction of compassion and care. Michael, observing the growing impact of the work they were doing, proposed something even bigger, expanding the Institute's model to other regions of the country. "We can create a network of centers of excellence," he explained during a board meeting. "Each one adapted to local needs, but all following the same principles of humanization and quality." The proposal was received with enthusiasm. Dr. Miller, who had become one of the main pillars of the Institute, was already beginning to map possible locations and partnerships. "But we need to maintain the essence," Emily reminded. "We can't become just a network of hospitals. Each center needs to be a place of transformation, of hope." It was at this moment that Michael shared his boldest idea: transforming the old meeting room of the Harrison Foundation, where so many questionable decisions had been made, into a living museum of the Institute's history. "We'll display not just our successes," he proposed, "but also our journey of transformation. Show how it's possible to change a story of power and greed into a story of love and service." The museum project quickly took shape. On its walls, photos told the story from the beginning: the rainy night of the accident, the first days at the hospital, the fight against corruption, the inauguration of the Institute. A special panel was dedicated to Sophia, her words of wisdom immortalized to inspire future generations. But the heart of the museum was a special room called Stories of Transformation, where patients, students, and professionals could record their own testimonials, creating a living archive of hope and overcoming. It was during the organization of this space that Emily found another surprise left by Sophia: a carefully assembled photo album with an attached note: "For when the right moment comes." The album contained photos from different phases of Michael's life, all accompanied by small reflections written by Sophia. The last page, however, was blank, with only a message: "This page is for the story you are writing now." Emily and Michael decided that blank page would be filled not only with their personal stories, but with the collective story of everyone who was part of the Sophia Harrison Institute, a story that would continue to be written for many generations, always, inspiring new chapters of love, care, and transformation. 2 years had passed since the inauguration of the Sophia Harrison Institute. The small seed of hope, planted on that rainy night, had blossomed into a leafy tree, whose fruits nourished dreams and transformed lives throughout the country. On sea. A special spring morning, Emily crossed the Institute's corridors with hurried steps. The place was bustling with preparations for the graduation of the first complete class of scholarship recipients. 100 young health professionals ready to spread the philosophy of care and compassion they had learned there across the country. "Emily," called a familiar voice. It was Lucy, one of the first scholarship recipients, now coordinator of the elderly care program. "I need to show you something amazing." In the Garden of Memories, a group of elderly people was participating in a special activity. They were recording their life stories for the museum's collection. Among them, Celeste was sharing more precious memories about Sophia. She had a special saying, the former housekeeper was telling, her eyes shining. She said that life is like a great embroidery. From behind, we see the knots and tangled threads, but on the front, a perfect design is formed. Emily smiled, thinking how perfectly that metaphor applied to the story they had lived. Each difficult moment, each obstacle overcome, had contributed to forming the greater design they now contemplated. Michael appeared in the garden, carrying a surprise. His mother's old diary had been transformed into a book. Heart Manual, Sophia Harrison's lessons on love and care, would be distributed for free in public hospitals across the country. "Look at this," he said, opening the book to a marked page. "I found this note from her about the day she met you at the hospital." Sophia's delicate handwriting filled the page. "Today I met a young nurse who reminded me that angels exist and prefer to wear scrubs rather than wings. There's a special light in her, the same light I see in my son's eyes. Perhaps the universe, in its infinite wisdom, will one day intertwine their paths." Emotion overcame Emily. So many years had passed since her shifts caring for Sophia, and yet the connection remained alive and pulsating. The graduation day arrived, transforming the Institute's auditorium into a sea of white scrubs and hopeful smiles. Each graduate carried a white orchid, Sophia's favorite flower, and a renewed commitment to humanized medicine. During the ceremony, an exciting surprise, representatives from 5 different states announced the implementation of new centers based on the Sophia Harrison Institute model. The dream of expansion was becoming reality. "But that's not all," announced Michael, his voice laden with emotion. "Each new center will have a garden of memories, a space dedicated to preserving stories of healing and transformation." The audience gave a standing ovation when Emily took the stage. Her speech to the graduates transcended protocol words, becoming a living testimony of how love can transform realities. "Each one of you," she said, looking into the eyes of the young professionals, "now carries not just a diploma, but a mission. The same mission that Sophia Harrison taught us, to transform knowledge into care, technique into compassion, power into service." At the end of the ceremony, while the graduates celebrated with their families, Emily and Michael found a moment of quietude in the Garden of Memories. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, colors that Sophia had loved so much. "You know what moves me the most?" said Emily, observing a young graduate hugging an elderly patient she had cared for during her internship. "Seeing how love has this multiplying power. Each life touched becomes a new source of light." Michael embraced her from behind, his eyes also fixed on the scene. "My mother always said that true love is like an inexhaustible fountain. The more you give, the more it renews itself." At that moment, a group of children from the pediatric program ran through the garden, filling the air with their laughter. Among them was little Johnny, now completely recovered from asthma, dreaming of becoming a doctor like Aunt Emily. The circle was complete. What had begun as an encounter in the rain had transformed into a wave of transformation that would continue to grow and touch lives for generations. The sunset tinged the sky of green hills with golden hues as Emily and Michael walked through the Garden of Memories, exactly 3 years after that rainy night that had changed their lives. The Sophia Harrison Institute pulsed with renewed energy. In the corridors, young doctors and nurses mingled with patients and visitors, creating a unique atmosphere of welcome and hope. "Look," said Emily, stopping near a particularly beautiful orchid. "This is the same species your mother cultivated." Michael smiled, recognizing the flower. She used to say that orchids are like love. They need patience, dedication, and the right environment to bloom. The moment was interrupted by a cheerful commotion coming from the new pediatric pavilion. A group of children, all wearing miniature scrubs, part of the Little Healers program, was participating in a special activity. Among them was Mary, the former hospital patient, now a volunteer in the program. "Do you know why this place is so special?" she was telling the children. "Because it began with a love story, a story that teaches us that the greatest miracles happen when we open our hearts to care for others." Emily and Michael observed the scene with emotion. The Institute had become much more than a health center. It was a radiating pole of social transformation. The numbers spoke for themselves: more than 1,000 scholarship graduates, 10 new centers spread across the country, thousands of lives transformed. But it wasn't just the numbers that mattered. It was the qualitative change in people's lives, the stories of overcoming, the smiles regained. The Garden of Memories, now filled with video testimonials, witnessed this daily transformation. "I found another of Mom's diaries," said Michael softly, taking a small notebook from his pocket. "This one is different from the others. These are predictions she made about the future." Together they sat on a garden bench, protected by the shade of a jabuticaba tree that Sophia had planted decades ago. The pages of the diary revealed not only dreams for the foundation, but also deep hopes for her son. "One day," read Michael, his voice thick with emotion, "my son will find someone who will make him understand that true power lies not in possessing, but in serving. Someone who, like him, carries in their heart the seed of transformation." Emily intertwined her fingers with his, moved. "Your mother had a special gift for seeing beyond the apparent. And she was right about everything," completed Michael. "About you, about us, about the power of love to transform realities." The sound of children's laughter continued to fill the air, mixing with the singing of birds and the whisper of leaves in the wind. On the horizon, the sun began its descent, painting the sky with the same colors as that fateful night. "You know what moves me the most?" said Emily, watching a young nurse help an elderly gentleman walk through the garden. "Seeing how each person who passes through here takes with them a seed of hope. It's as if we were cultivating an infinite garden of possibilities." Michael embraced her tenderly. "And to think that it all began with a gesture of love, you stopping in the rain to help a stranger." "It wasn't coincidence," smiled Emily. "It was your mother guiding our paths even after departing." The Institute continued its tireless work, now a beacon of hope for the entire country. The humanized management model had become an international reference, inspiring changes in healthcare systems around the world. But for Emily and Michael, true success wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the daily small miracles, in the smile of a recovered child, in the grateful embrace of an elderly person, in the dedication of young professionals who carried forward Sophia's legacy. The sun finally set, but the garden remained illuminated, not just by the soft lights distributed among the flowers, but by the special glow that only true love can create.